The heavy glass door of the saffron static was a portal, and I pushed through it like a diver breaking the surface, trading the damp, salt-laced air of Hawthorne Bay for a wall of sound and heat. Inside. The bass wasn't just something you heard, it was a physical presence. A frantic heartbeat thrumming up through the soles of my boots and into my ribs. Amber lights, thick as honey, swept across the room in lazy arcs, painting fleeting portraits on the faces of strangers. A bead of sweat traced a path down someone's temple, catching the light like a tiny, falling star. The air was dense with the smells of expensive cologne, spilled gin, and the collective exhalation of 100 bodies seeking escape. This was my escape, too. A self-prescribed trial by fire. 1 year. It had been 1 year of rebuilding, of gluing the shattered pieces of Marin Cole back together after Tyler Holt had walked away, leaving behind a silence that echoed louder than any argument we ever had. Tonight was about proving I hadn't just survived the wreckage, I had built something new from it. My eyes, trained by years behind a lens, scanned the crowd, instinctively framing shots, capturing details, the flash of a silver ring on a gesturing hand, the way a woman's red dress swirled like liquid fire as she turned, the taut line of a man's jaw as he watched the dancers. I wasn't the Marine I used to be, the ballerina who lived for precision and applause, whose world was confined to the perfect lines of a stage. That girl had been fragile, easily broken. Now, I was a freelance photojournalist. My stage was the gritty, sprawling port of Hawthorne Bay, and my subject was the silent, illicit commerce that flowed through its veins like a poison. I hunted shadows and whispers, chasing down rumors of unauthorized shipments that moved under the cloak of night. It was dangerous, messy work, and it was the only thing that made me feel whole. And then I saw him. Tyler. He was leaning against the polished mahogany of the main bar, a crystal glass of whiskey cradled in his hand. He looked the same, the easy confidence, the perfectly tailored shirt, the way his blonde hair fell just so across his forehead. But the woman beside him was new. She was radiant, laughing at something he'd said, her teeth a perfect, bright white against her crimson lipstick. She touched his arm, a casual, proprietary gesture that sent a jolt of acid straight to my stomach. Pride, that old stubborn ghost, rose up in my throat, hot and demanding. I felt the floor tilt beneath me, the carefully constructed walls of my new life threatening to crumble. I wouldn't let him see it. I would not let him see me break. I took a steadying breath, the air tasting metallic on my tongue. That's when a voice, low and smooth with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place in Italian-American cadence, perhaps weathered by time, and the city spoke from just beside me. You look like you're about to either cry or write an obituary. I turned. A man had appeared out of the shifting throng, a pocket of stillness in the club's chaotic energy. He was dressed in a dark, impeccably cut suit, but there was nothing corporate about him. He wore no tie, the top button of his shirt undone. His wrists were bare, and on one, a thin, silvery scar cut a delicate line across the skin. But it was his eyes that held me. They were dark and calm, possessing a quiet intensity that seemed to absorb the flashing lights around us. A gaze as steady and deep as the night tide pulling at the bay. He wasn't looking at me with pity or curiosity. He was simply observing, reading the scene. My reply came out sharper than I intended. Maybe I'm doing both. A corner of his mouth tilted up. Not quite a smile, an efficient use of grief. His gaze flickered past me, towards the bar. It was a fractional movement, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. His eyes settled on Tyler for a single, frozen second in their dark depths. A flicker of recognition ignited, cold and sharp as a shard of ice, and then it was gone. Extinguished as quickly as it had appeared, the placid surface was restored, but I had seen the disturbance beneath. He knew him, or he knew of him. The thought sent an unsettling chill down my spine. My resolve hardened. I wasn't a victim in his story anymore. I wasn't the ghost at his feast. I turned my back on the bar, on the past, and looked straight at the stranger beside me. The dance floor was a writhing sea of bodies, a blur of motion and color. It was an escape. It was a stage. "Could you dance with me?" The words tumbled out, fueled by a reckless surge of defiance. I met his gaze directly, holding it. "My ex is watching from the bar." For a moment, he said nothing. He just watched me, his expression unreadable. I expected him to refuse, to laugh, to dismiss me as just another woman nursing a broken heart in a loud club. Instead, he extended his hand. His fingernails were clean, cut short and practical. As his fingers brushed mine, I felt the slight, rough texture of calluses on his palm. It wasn't the soft hand of a man who only signed contracts. It was the hand of someone who held the wheel, who gripped things, who applied pressure. "Lucian Ardito," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the music. "Marin Cole." His grip was firm as he led me towards the dance floor. We moved through the crowd like he was parting the sea, people shifting aside without seeming to notice him. It was then, out of the corner of my eye, that I saw them. Two men, standing near a pillar. They were dressed in plainclothes jeans, dark jackets, but they stood with a ramrod stillness that didn't belong here. An almost invisible wire snaked from behind one man's ear down into his collar. Earpieces. They weren't club security. They were watching, scanning, their eyes moving with a purpose that made my skin prickle. My journalistic instincts kicked in, a silent alarm bell ringing in my head. We reached an open space on the floor, and Lucian turned to face me, one hand settling lightly on the small of my back. The music was a driving beat, relentless and primal. I glanced over his shoulder. Tyler had seen us. A slow, mocking smirk spread across his face as he lifted his glass in a sarcastic toast. The sight of it lit a fire in my chest. I clenched my jaw, lifted my chin a fraction higher, and met Lucian's steady gaze. He saw the shift in me, the flicker of defiance. He simply nodded, as if to say, "I see you." I was no longer Marin of yesterday. That woman would have fled. This one would stand her ground. This one would dance. As Lucian led me into the rhythm, my mind felt like a camera lens, spinning and refocusing with dizzying speed. The dance floor became a blur of amber and shadow. The bar, with Tyler's smug face, became a distant, static image. Lucian's eyes, dark and unblinking, became my anchor point. And then, as he spun me in a slow, deliberate turn, my gaze snagged on something. A door to a VIP room, slightly ajar. It was mostly in shadow, but a sliver of light from within illuminated 4 bold white letters stenciled on the dark wood. M-C-O. My breath caught. IMCO, Interstate Maritime Compliance Office. It sounded official, bureaucratic, a port oversight agency. But in all my months of research, digging through public records, maritime charts, and government databases for my story on the port, I had never once come across that name. It didn't exist, not officially anyway. The camera in my mind zoomed in, the letters filling my vision, stark and mysterious, the dance floor, the ex-boyfriend. Even the intense man holding me seemed to fade into the background. In that moment, I knew my night had just changed. This was no longer about surviving a painful encounter. It was about the story, and it had just walked right up to me and asked me to dance. The muscle memory from 1,000 ballet classes took over. My body knew the steps, the turn of a shoulder, the placement of a foot, but this was different. Ballroom had been about performance, about creating a flawless illusion for an audience. Dancing with Lucian was about communication. He led with an unwavering certainty, his hand a firm, steady pressure against my back. There was no flourish, no unnecessary showmanship. Every movement was economical, precise, and utterly in control. We were close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating through the fine wool of his suit jacket, close enough that if I tilted my head, I could have rested it against his chest and heard his heartbeat. Yet, there was a deliberate, respectful distance maintained between us, a sliver of charged air that felt more intimate than any touch. The noise of the club was a physical barrier, forcing us into a proximity that felt both necessary and dangerous. He leaned in slightly, his voice a low vibration near my ear that cut through the pounding bass as if it were the only sound in the room. "Who are you watching?" he murmured, his breath barely stirring my hair. "The old flame, or the arrivals board at the port?" My feet faltered. For a single catastrophic beat, I forgot how to move, my body freezing mid-step. He held me steady, his grip firming just enough to prevent a stumble, his movements never ceasing as he guided me back into the rhythm. It was so seamless no one would have noticed. But to me, it felt as though the floor had dropped away. How could he possibly know my investigation was a secret world I inhabited alone, a collection of grainy, long-lens photographs, shipping manifests I'd acquired through less than official channels, and a wall in my tiny apartment covered in a web of names and dates connected by red string. It was my obsession, my penance, and my shield, and he had just walked through it like it was an unlocked door. I stared up at him, my eyes wide with a question I couldn't voice. He simply held my gaze, his own expression giving nothing away. Over his shoulder, I saw Tyler move. The smug smirk was gone, replaced by a tight, anxious line around his mouth. He pulled his phone from his pocket, turning his back to the room as he put it to his ear. He paced a short line, his free hand gesturing impatiently. For a moment, the screen of his phone caught the light, and my photographer's eyes instinctively focused, capturing the detail. It was an application I didn't recognize, but the iconography was unmistakable stylized symbols of cargo ships, numerical strings followed by port abbreviations, and color-coded status alerts. It was a logistics app, the kind someone deeply involved in port operations would use, the kind that tracks vessels in real time. The personal sting of his new companion faded, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a lead. This wasn't just a painful memory. Tyler was a part of the story. Lucian must have felt the shift in my focus. His next move was fluid, a masterful turn that spun me around, seamlessly positioning his body to block my view of the bar, of Tyler. Now, all I could see was him. "If you want to unnerve him," he whispered, his voice a conspiratorial rumble, "smile at me now. Smile like we have a secret the rest of the world isn't clever enough to understand." It was a dare, a manipulation, and I took it, a part of me, the part that still ached with Tyler's betrayal, wanted to inflict a small measure of the same confusion he'd left me in. I let a slow, genuine smile spread across my face, tipping my head slightly as if he'd just shared the most delicious secret. I let my gaze soften, holding his as if he were the only person in this crowded, throbbing room. From the corner of my eye, I saw the result. Tyler's head snapped back in our direction. His knuckles went white as he gripped his whiskey glass, his entire body going rigid. The cool, confident facade shattered, revealing the raw anger beneath. He had been so sure of his power over me, of his ability to cast me aside and remain unaffected. This me, with this man, sharing a secret smile was a variable he hadn't accounted for. As we moved, I became acutely aware of how Lucian was watching me. It was an unnerving, analytical gaze. He wasn't looking at my body in the way most men in a club did. His eyes weren't drawn to the neckline of my dress or the length of my legs. Instead, he seemed to be cataloging data, the rhythm of my breathing, the exact moment I shifted my weight before a turn, the tension in my shoulders. He was reading me, not as a woman, but as a system of movements and responses. He was learning how I operated. The knowledge was both frightening and strangely validating. He saw me, not the broken ballerina or the jilted ex-girlfriend. He saw the observer, the analyst, and so I decided to risk a probe of my own, leaning in, using the music as cover. I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I saw the letters on that door. "What is IMCO?" His rhythm didn't falter. "A paper shield," he answered, his voice low and even. "And sometimes an iron cage." The words were a riddle wrapped in a threat. It confirmed my suspicions it was a front. But for whom? And for what? Was it a flimsy authority meant to be ignored, or a trap for those who got too close before I could process it? The song ended, bleeding into something slower, a soulful, melancholic melody that changed the entire atmosphere on the dance floor. The frantic energy dissipated, and couples drew closer. Lucian didn't pull me closer, not immediately, but the space between us felt different now, charged with unspoken questions. His hand remained on my back, a point of constant, solid warmth. It felt safe. It was a feeling I hadn't realized I'd missed so desperately, a steady anchor in a churning sea of uncertainty. But my instincts, honed by months of lurking in the shadows of the port, screamed a warning. This man was the anchor, but he might also be the depths. Trusting an impulse I didn't fully understand, I decided to offer a piece of the truth. It was a calculated risk, a lure to see what he would reveal in return. "I'm tracking a line of unauthorized shipments through Granite Pier," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "Counterfeit modern art used to conceal shipments of illicit pain relievers. I have a photograph, blurry, of a container. It's labeled Artemis 47. I watched his face for any reaction. There was nothing. No flicker of surprise, no sign of recognition. He simply continued to lead me through the slow, easy steps of the dance, his expression unreadable. For several long seconds, the only sounds were the music and the soft scuff of our shoes on the floor. Then he spoke. "You've chosen big enemies." It wasn't a question or a warning. It was a flat statement of fact. And with those 5 words, he confirmed everything. He knew. He knew the players, the stakes, the container with the mythological name. He knew the danger I had unknowingly been circling. A shadow fell over us. "Marin, still like making a scene?" Tyler's voice was a sneer, dripping with condescension. He stood there, his face a mask of bitter amusement, trying to reclaim his power, to reduce me to the dramatic girl he thought he knew. I tensed, ready to fire back a retort, but Lucian was faster. He didn't even fully turn to face Tyler. He simply adjusted his position slightly, a subtle act of possession, and spoke without a trace of emotion in his voice. "She's busy." The dismissal was so complete, so absolute, that Tyler was left momentarily speechless. He had come looking for a fight, a reaction, and had been met with a wall of sheer indifference. He glared, first at Lucian, then at me, defeated. He took a step back, but before he turned away, his eyes met mine, and the message in them was cold and clear. A silent communication that had nothing to do with us and everything to do with the container ships on his phone. "Tonight, the schedule is changing." He melted back toward the bar, leaving me alone in the steady hold of the stranger who knew all my secrets. The dance was ending, but the real story, the one written in shadows and shipping codes, had just pulled me onto its floor. The music faded, and when the next song started, the space he had occupied was empty. Lucian Ardito was gone. He hadn't said goodbye or offered a parting glance. He had simply dissolved back into the crowd, a ghost of smoke in a room full of bodies. I stood there for a moment, the warmth of his hand still a phantom sensation on my back, a dozen unanswered questions swirling in my head, a paper shield, an iron cage. He knew about my investigation. He knew about Artemis 47, and he had looked at Tyler with the cold recognition of a predator spotting a rival. My mission here was done. The need to prove something to Tyler had evaporated, replaced by the urgent, metallic taste of a real story. I threaded my way through the throng, keeping my head down, near the entrance. I saw him again. Tyler. He was no longer with the woman in the red dress. He was in a shadowed alcove, speaking with a nondescript man in a gray suit. As I watched, shielded by a decorative pillar, I saw Tyler discreetly pass the man a small, black object, a USB drive. I lifted my camera, a compact mirrorless model I always carried, and pretended to adjust the settings. Through the viewfinder, I framed the shot, the handoff, the anonymous faces, the urgency in their posture. The shutter clicked, a sound no one but me could hear. I now had 2 new pieces for my wall, the letters IMCO, and a digital ghost in a gray suit. The drive back to my loft was on autopilot. The city lights of Hawthorne Bay smeared across my windshield, warped by the fine mist that was beginning to fall. My apartment was a small, converted attic space in a forgotten building that overlooked a decommissioned shipyard. Rusting skeletons of old trawlers and forgotten cranes were my neighbors. The air here always smelled of salt, decay, and the faint, lingering scent of diesel. It was a place for ghosts, which suited me just fine. Inside, I didn't bother with the lights. I dropped my keys on a stack of books and went straight to the heart of my world, the wall. In the glow of my desk lamp, it came alive. It was a chaotic mural of my obsession. Dozens of black and white photographs were tacked to the corkboard, long lens shots of dock workers, grainy images of container serial numbers, clandestine photos of meetings in waterfront diners, shipping manifests, tide charts, and printouts of corporate registries were layered between them, all connected by a spiderweb of red and yellow string. This was my brain. Externalized, this was the story I was trying to piece together from the city's discarded fragments. I slotted the memory card from my camera into my laptop. The new images appeared on the screen. First, the crisp, clear shot of the IMCO door. I printed it, the ink still smelling sharp as I tacked it to a blank space on the board. Then, the picture of Tyler. I zoomed in, clarifying the image, capturing the worried expression on his face, the almost desperate way he pushed the drive into the other man's hand. I printed that too. 2 new stars in my constellation of crime. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Tyler's panicked call and the shipping app on his phone were the key. He'd received a message that changed things, a schedule change. I pulled up the port's public vessel tracking system, a tool I knew was often a day or two behind the reel. Internal schedules I sometimes managed to access. The cargo ship Sable Dawn. The vessel I'd linked to the Artemis 47 container was listed as arriving tomorrow at noon. But when I cross-referenced it with a leaked schedule from a disgruntled port dispatcher, the truth was there in stark, digital text. Sable Dawn. Arrival 22:40. Status berthed. It had arrived early, tonight. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I dug deeper, searching for the container's offload destination. And there it was. Container Art 47. Disposition temporary hold. Location North Key 12. Authority IMCO. IMCO. The ghost agency. The paper shield. It was all happening now. They were moving the shipment. Tyler's job was to facilitate it, to ensure the digital and financial pathways were clear. This was it. The core of the operation. Just as I stood up, my phone buzzed on the desk, a number I didn't recognize. It was a text message. My blood went cold. Don't go to North Key 12. Below the words was an attachment. I clicked on it. It was a photograph of me. I was walking out of the saffron static, my back to the camera, the club's neon sign casting a faint red glow on my hair. It had been taken less than an hour ago. Someone had been watching me. Someone knew who I was, where I was going, and what I was looking for. This wasn't a warning from a friend. It was a threat from a player in the game who wanted me off the board. For a moment, fear, cold and paralyzing, seized me. I could stop. I could delete the message, tear down the wall, and walk away. I could go back to taking pictures of city architecture and pretend I had never seen the shadows moving on the water. But I couldn't. The journalist in me, the woman who had clawed her way back from nothing, wouldn't allow it. This threat didn't scare me off. It proved I was close to the truth. I grabbed my camera bag, a small scanner that could detect density and metallic signatures, and my keys. The rain was heavier now, a salty, wind-driven spray that whipped at my face as I ran to my car. North Key 12 was in the oldest, most dilapidated section of the port. The streetlights here were mostly dead, their posts tattooed with rust. The warehouse was a colossal, windowless box of corrugated metal, its vast, dark entrance yawning like the mouth of a shark ready to swallow me whole. I parked a block away and approached on foot, sticking to the deepest shadows. The only sounds were the groaning of mooring lines and the rhythmic slap of waves against the pier. A side door was secured with a simple padlock. My lock-picking skills, a relic from a misspent youth, were rusty but functional. The lock clicked open with a sound that seemed deafeningly loud in the oppressive silence. I slipped inside, closing the door gently behind me. The air in the warehouse was cold and still, thick with the smell of dust and damp concrete. My eyes adjusted to the gloom. The cavernous space was filled with dozens of large, abstract shapes, all shrouded in thick, gray felt, like a gallery of sleeping giants. They were sculptures, just as my source had suggested. I pulled out my handheld scanner and powered it on, the small screen casting a greenish glow on my face. I ran it over the nearest sculpture. The screen displayed a low-density reading for the outer layers, but deep in the center, a cluster of thin, metallic objects appeared as a dense, red mass, not a solid core, but a collection of smaller items. I moved deeper into the forest of shrouded figures, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence. I was right. I was in the belly of the beast. Suddenly, a bank of harsh, industrial fluorescent lights flickered on, flooding the warehouse with a sterile, white glare. I froze, blinking against the brutal brightness. "Looking for something," a voice called out. Two men stepped out from behind a stack of crates. They wore dark work jackets with no logos, but they moved with the coordinated efficiency of law enforcement. They were the men I'd seen in the club, the ones with the earpieces. IMCO. They fanned out, flanking me, cutting off any escape back the way I came. My mind raced, searching for an exit, an option, anything. I started backing away slowly, my hands held up in a placating gesture. "I think I'm in the wrong place." "You're in exactly the right place," the taller one said, a cold smile playing on his lips. "You just weren't invited." My heel hit something hard. I glanced down. It was the control panel for a large conveyor belt that ran through the center of the warehouse. My clumsy retreat had bumped a large, red emergency stop button and then a green activation switch next to it. With a low groan of protesting machinery, the belt lurched into motion. One of the felt-wrapped sculptures sitting on the belt jolted forward, its protective casing, not properly secured, snagged on a protruding bolt. The felt tore, and a section of the plaster shell cracked and fell away, shattering on the concrete floor. And the sculpture's secret spilled out. It wasn't art. It was a hollow cavity, packed with hundreds of small, vacuum-sealed plastic bags filled with white pills. One of the bags ripped open, scattering its contents across the moving belt. Taped to each bag was a tiny, blinking microchip, a GPS tracker. An ear-splitting alarm began to blare, its siren echoing painfully in the vast space. The trap had been sprung. The two men abandoned all pretense of a calm conversation and charged at me. Adrenaline surged through me, a jolt of pure, primal survival. I spun around and sprinted, not towards the door I came in, but towards a smaller fire exit I had spotted on the far wall. I slammed my shoulder against the push bar and burst out into the rain-swept night. I didn't see where I was going. I just ran. I was halfway across the wet asphalt when a pair of headlights sliced through the darkness, pinning me in their glare. A black sedan, sleek and silent, slid to a perfect stop directly in my path, blocking my escape. For a heartbeat, I thought it was them. I thought I was trapped. Then, the passenger side door swung open. Lucian, he was behind the wheel, his face cast in the dim glow of the dashboard. He didn't look surprised or panicked. He looked like he had been expecting me. "In," he commanded, his voice calm and clear over the sound of the rain and the still blaring alarm. I didn't hesitate. I scrambled into the car, pulling the heavy door shut as he hit the accelerator. The tires squealed on the wet ground, and the warehouse and my pursuers vanished behind us. I was shaking, my clothes soaked through, my lungs burning. The tremors weren't just from the cold, they were the aftershocks of pure terror. Without taking his eyes off the rearview mirror, Lucian reached over and shrugged off his heavy wool overcoat, draping it over my shoulders. It was incredibly warm and smelled faintly of night air, expensive fabric, and something else, something clean and metallic like the rain. We drove in silence for several minutes as he navigated the labyrinthine streets of the port, checking every reflection for any sign of a tail. Finally, when he seemed satisfied we weren't being followed, he spoke, his voice a low, steady anchor in the chaotic aftermath of my escape. IMCO isn't a real government agency, he said, his eyes meeting mine in the mirror. It's just a name on a rented badge. He paused, letting the words sink in, before delivering the final blow. And Tyler is more than just your ex-boyfriend. We didn't drive into the city. Instead, Lucian guided the car down a series of private, unmarked roads that hugged the coastline, leading to a part of the bay I never knew existed. He stopped before a long, private pier that stretched out into the dark water. At its end stood a building that seemed to be made entirely of glass and steel, a stark, modernist jewel box floating on the waves, the Astoria Pier House. It was a place of impossible architecture and silent money, a world away from the grit and rust of North Key 12. Inside, the silence was profound. The space was minimalist, furnished with low-slung leather couches and stark, beautiful art that I now suspected was entirely authentic. The floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the bay and the distant glittering lights of Hawthorne Bay. It felt like being on a ship, adrift in the night. His overcoat was still around my shoulders, a heavy, warm shroud that smelled of him. I was still trembling, the adrenaline from my escape slowly being replaced by a deep, bone-aching chill. Lucian didn't ask questions. He moved to a sleek, modern kitchen that was part of the open-plan living space. He opened a cabinet, his movements efficient and quiet, and took out a kettle and a small ceramic teapot as he sliced fresh ginger with a small, sharp knife. I watched his hands. In the club, I had noticed the calluses. Here, under the focused glow of the kitchen lights, I saw more. A network of fine, silvery scars crisscrossed his knuckles and the backs of his hands. They were old cuts, long since healed, the kind a man gets from handling rigging, from prying open stubborn crates, from a life of physical work that had nothing to do with signing papers or shaking hands. He wasn't just a boss. He had been a worker. He had been on the docks. He brought the steaming mug of ginger tea to me where I stood by the glass wall. Looking out at the black water, I took it. My cold fingers wrapping around the warm ceramic, the spicy, clean scent rose to meet me, a small comfort in a world that had just been torn apart. I took a sip, the heat spreading through my chest, and finally found my voice. I turned to face him, the coat slipping slightly from my shoulders. "Who are you, Lucian?" He didn't feign confusion. He met my gaze, his own dark and steady, and gave me the courtesy of a real answer, though it was cloaked in the language of a poet or a king. "I'm a collector," he said, his voice a low, even timbre, someone who gathers the broken pieces the city throws away and assembles them into power. I waited, letting the silence press him for more. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging my right to know. "I run the Ardito Consortium. You won't find it listed in any business directory. We provide escort services for commerce moving through these waters." He gestured to the vast, dark expanse beyond the glass. "This port is a chaotic, lawless place. The official channels are slow, corrupt, and blind. We provide a different kind of order. We ensure certain goods pass through unmolested, and we ensure other, more toxic cargo never makes it to shore. We tax the chaos." The pieces clicked into place, forming a picture that was both terrifying and possessed a strange, brutal logic. He was a crime lord, a mob boss, but he didn't see himself that way. He saw himself as a regulator, a self-appointed guardian of the waterline. "The art, the pills, Artemis 47, I said, the name feeling strange on my tongue. "That's one of the toxic ones." "Highly," he confirmed. "A shipment like that brings the wrong kind of attention. It brings uncontrolled violence. It poisons the city. It's bad for business, My business. My mind spun back to the club, to the mocking smirk on Tyler's face, and IMCO Tyler. Lucian's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. IMCO is the paper shield for a rival faction, a group with less discerning standards. They use the facade of a compliance agency to move their product and eliminate competition. Your ex-boyfriend, Marin, is one of their financial instruments. He cleans their money, making it look like legitimate investment capital from his firm. A wave of hot, furious anger washed over me, so potent it made me dizzy. It wasn't just about the breakup anymore. It wasn't just the humiliation of seeing him with another woman. All this time, I had constructed a narrative of our ending that I could live with. I'd told myself Tyler left because he was drowning in debt, because he was ashamed, because he couldn't handle the pressure. It was a sad story, but it was a human one. The truth was so much uglier. He hadn't just left me. He had sold out the entire city, the very port that was its lifeblood, to a shadowy group poisoning its streets. He had chosen this. He had betrayed everything. Lucian saw the storm in my eyes. He used your history, your father's work at the port, to get his initial access. He learned the routes and the schedules at your dinner table. That was the final, devastating blow. My father had been a harbor master, an honest man who loved the sea and the grimy, beautiful chaos of the docks. Tyler had used that legacy, my legacy, as his key to unlock the city's back door. I'm going to expose him, I said, my voice shaking with a rage that was cold and pure. I'm going to publish everything, the photos, the shipping manifests, IMCO, all of it. And you'll be dead before the story even hits the server, Lucian stated, not as a threat, but as a simple, unassailable fact. These people don't just issue rebuttals to the press. Marin, they eliminate the source. He took a step closer. But there is another way, a way for you to get your story and stay alive. He was proposing a deal. I could feel it. What way? You give me your evidence, he said. The photographs, the manifests, everything you have on Artemis 47. You go home, you lock your door, and you wait. I will use what you've given me to intercept the shipment and dismantle their operation from the inside. I will handle it. And what do I get? I asked, my voice laced with suspicion. You get the story of a lifetime, he said, his eyes intense. Once it's over, I will give you an exclusive. I will lay out the entire operation for you, a rival syndicate, a corrupt port authority official who takes the fall, a heroic, anonymous source. It will be a neat, tidy narrative with a clear villain and a satisfying conclusion. It will be worthy of a Pulitzer, and it will keep my name and the true nature of this port out of it. I stared at him, my mind reeling. He was offering me a story, a perfect, beautiful, award-winning lie. He was offering to hand me a victory, but one that was completely choreographed, its truth sculpted to fit his agenda. He wanted me to be his publicist, to frame him as a shadowy hero while he consolidated his own power. No, I said, the word coming out sharp and final. He raised an eyebrow. No, I don't report on choreographed stories. Lucian, I'm a journalist. I report on the truth, the whole messy, complicated truth. That includes you. That includes the Ardito Consortium and its tax on chaos. I will not be a pawn in your game for control of the waterfront. This isn't a game. His voice dropped, losing its detached calm for the first time, replaced by a raw, jagged intensity. He took another step, closing the distance between us until we were barely a foot apart. This is survival. You walked into a war zone tonight armed with a camera. I'm offering you armor, and you're throwing it back in my face out of some misplaced, naive belief in the purity of the truth. My belief isn't naive, I shot back, stepping forward to meet his challenge, my own anger flaring. It's all I have left. It's the one thing Tyler couldn't take from me, my integrity, and I am not for sale, not to him, and not to you. We were so close now. I could feel the heat coming off him, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. His chest rose and fell with his quickening breath, and I was instinctively mirroring it, our rhythms falling into a tense, angry syncopation. The air between us was thick, electric with the friction of our two worlds colliding. His pragmatism against my principles, his power against my truth, and beneath it all, a current of something else, something undeniable and dangerous, was pulling us closer, a tide of pure, magnetic attraction. He seemed to feel it, too. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by something more complex, something vulnerable. He broke the stare first, his gaze dropping to my mouth for a fraction of a second before lifting back to my eyes. He took a half step back, a deliberate retreat, creating a space that felt even more charged than the proximity had. "May I touch you?" he asked. The question stunned me into silence. In a night of threats and danger and raw emotion, this quiet, simple request for permission was the most disarming thing of all. No one had asked my permission for anything in a very long time. Men like Tyler took. This man, this dangerous man who taxed the chaos, was asking. I could only manage a nod, a single, small movement. He closed the distance again, slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. He didn't try to kiss me. He simply rested his forehead against mine, a gesture of profound, unexpected intimacy. His hands came up to rest on my back, broad and warm, holding me with a gentle strength that was a stark contrast to the violence I knew he was capable of. I closed my eyes, my own hands finding their way to his chest, feeling the steady, solid beat of his heart beneath my palm. We just stood there, breathing each other's air, our heartbeats a quiet, steady rhythm against the silence of the room and the sound of the distant waves. It was a hug, but it felt like more. It was an admission. It was an anchor. After a year of feeling invisible, of feeling like a ghost haunting the edges of my own life, I felt seen. I felt solid. After a long moment, he pulled back, though his hands lingered on my back. "You need to rest," he said, his voice soft now. "You're not safe at your apartment tonight." He led me to a guest room, as minimalist and beautiful as the rest of the house, a simple bed with white linens and another wall of glass looking out at the endless water. "Sleep here," he said from the doorway. "No one will find you." I watched him as he turned to leave, and a thought, born of fear and a strange, new trust, made me speak. "Where will you be?" He paused and looked back at me, on the couch, just outside this door. He wouldn't be far. He would be a guardian. "The boundaries will be respected, Marin." He pulled the door almost closed, leaving just a sliver of light from the main room cutting across the floor. The tension between us remained, a live wire humming in the space between the guest room and the couch, a promise and a warning, held in perfect, fragile balance. I woke to the pale, gray light of dawn filtering through the glass walls. I hadn't meant to sleep, but the exhaustion had been a lead weight, pulling me under. For a moment, I was disoriented, the unfamiliar room and the gentle sound of water lapping against the pier below confusing me. Then the night before came rushing back in a single, heart-stopping wave. The club, the warehouse, the pills, the escape. I sat up. Lucian's coat still pulled around me. On a low table beside the bed, a single sheet of paper lay next to a fresh mug of tea. It was a hand-drawn map, sketched with clean, precise lines. It was a schematic of Granite Pier. He'd marked the location of the IMCO warehouse, the patrol routes of the dock security, and the blind spots in the security camera coverage. A new time was circled in red ink next to a notation for a container crane. 11:40 p.m. Tyler's message about a schedule change had been intercepted and understood. This wasn't a surrender, it was a countermove. Lucian was standing by the glass wall, a silhouette against the morning sky, a phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low, rapid Italian, a language I didn't understand but whose cadence was all business. He finished his call and turned to me, his face unreadable. "They're moving it tonight," he said, stating the obvious. "They know their first location is compromised. They'll be nervous. It's our best chance." He handed me a tiny, flesh-colored earpiece. It was small enough to be hidden by my hair, My team will be on the ground, blended with the night shift crews. You will be up here." He tapped the drawing of the gantry crane. "You have the photographer's eye. You see things other people miss. You will be our lookout. If anything deviates from the plan, if you see something that feels wrong, you say one word into the mic." "What word?" "Amber," he said. "Just Amber. And we will create a new plan." The hours that followed were a blur of tense preparation. By nightfall, the air was electric. The rain had returned, a fine, persistent drizzle that blurred the halogen lights of the port into golden halos. Dressed in dark, practical clothing, I climbed the endless series of iron ladders to the operator's cab of the gantry crane. My camera bag slung securely over my shoulder. The cab was a small glass box suspended in the sky, giving me a god's-eye view of the entire quay. The earpiece in my ear was silent, but it was a tangible link to Lucien, a tether in the darkness, through my telephoto lens. The scene below sprang into sharp focus. I could see Lucien's men, indistinguishable from the other dockworkers in their hard hats and high-visibility vests, moving into position. At precisely 11:35 p.m., a convoy of 2 black sedans and a flatbed truck rolled onto the pier, stopping near the new warehouse. Tyler stepped out of the lead car. He was flanked by several men in dark jackets with the IMCO logo embroidered on the chest. It was a full-blown inspection team, a show of force meant to intimidate the regular port staff into looking the other way. A crane operator began the slow, deliberate process of lifting a container from a stack. I zoomed in, my heart pounding. The stenciled code was visible under the harsh lights. Artemis 47, but something was wrong. Over the original white letters, a new code had been hastily spray-painted in black Arado 19. They had relabeled it. A simple but effective trick to confuse any manifest checks. The scene played out with a tense, almost theatrical slowness. The newly christened Arado 19 was lowered onto the flatbed. The IMCO men watched, their arms crossed, a perimeter of false authority. Tyler paced back and forth, speaking into his phone. It all seemed too simple, too obvious. My instincts screamed that it was a performance. I started scanning the rest of the area, my lens sweeping across the stacks of containers, the parked vehicles, the shadows between the buildings. Amber, the word was on the tip of my tongue. I felt a deep, gut-level certainty that we were all watching the wrong thing. And then I saw it. 2 of Lucien's men, supposedly part of the crew managing the decoy container, had detached from the main group. They were near a stack of containers marked as empty and awaiting transport. But they weren't just standing guard. One of them was working on the lock of a container on the ground level, while the other watched the IMCO team. This was it. The real shipment wasn't in Artemis 47 at all. That was the bait. The pills were in an anonymous empty box, ready to be moved quietly once the performance with the decoy was over. "Amber," I whispered into the tiny microphone. The response was immediate. Below me, a forklift that had been sitting idle suddenly roared to life. Lucien was at the wheel. He swerved, not towards the decoy, but towards a massive stack of empty pallets near where Tyler was standing. He turned sharply, as if losing control, and the forklift's tines clipped the base of the stack. For a moment, it seemed to defy gravity, and then the entire tower of wood, 20 feet high, crashed down with a sound like a series of gunshots. Chaos erupted. The IMCO team flinched and scattered, their attention instantly ripped away from the container and focused on the accident. Tyler dove out of the way, shouting curses, in that moment of manufactured confusion. Lucien's 2 men at the other container swung its doors open, and a third man backed a small, unmarked utility truck up to it. The transfer had begun, hidden in plain sight. It was a brilliant diversion, but as I tracked the scene, my lens panning from the chaos to the real transfer, a flash of movement caught my eye. One of the IMCO men, shrewder than the rest, hadn't been distracted. He was looking around, his eyes scanning methodically, searching for the cause of the perfectly timed disruption. His gaze swept upwards, across the steel latticework of the crane, and stopped. He looked right at my glass box. He saw me. He raised his hand and pointed, shouting something I couldn't hear over the noise. Two of his men broke off and started running for the base of my crane. My escape route was gone. Panic seized me for a second. Cold and sharp, I scrambled out of the cab and onto the narrow metal walkway. The rain had made the grated surface slick and treacherous. Below, the world was a dizzying patchwork of lights and moving figures. The chase was on. I could hear their heavy boots clanging on the iron rungs of the ladder below me. I ran, my only thought to get down, to get to the ground, to find an escape route through the maze of containers. I swung myself over the railing and onto a service ladder, my hands gripping the cold, wet metal. I descended as fast as I could, the rain stinging my face, turning into a silver-streaked blur under the port lights. My foot slipped. For a terrifying second, my full weight was held by just my hands. My grip, slick with rain, began to fail. I felt my fingers sliding, the rough texture of the rung scraping my palm. Just as my grip gave way, a hand shot out of the darkness below me and clamped around my wrist like a steel vice. "I've got you." Lucien, and he had climbed up from the other side, his face level with my feet, the scent of the sea breeze and the faint, warm smell of his leather jacket cut through the metallic tang of the rain. His grip was absolute, unwavering. He held me there, suspended between the sky and the ground, until my feet found purchase on the rung again. "Come on," he urged, and we scrambled the rest of the way down, landing on the wet concrete in the deep shadow of the crane's legs. The IMCO men were still descending. We ran, weaving through the labyrinth of shipping containers. We ducked behind a row of the same felt-wrapped sculptures I had seen in the warehouse. As we pressed ourselves into the narrow space between two of them, my hand brushed against a wooden crate that was different from the others. It was smaller, and the slats were pried open. Inside, nestled in a bed of packing straw, was a simple, cheap picture frame. But something was wrong. Taped to the back of the frame, almost invisible in the gloom, was a tiny memory card. It was the real prize, the data. "Lucien," I whispered, pulling it free. Before he could respond, Tyler's voice echoed through the containers, amplified by the high metal walls. "They're in here. Seal the whole key." Headlights flared at both ends of the aisle. We were boxed in. Lucien grabbed my hand. "This way." He pulled me towards a set of train tracks that ran alongside the key. In the distance, a yard engine's horn blared a deafening warning. The ground began to vibrate. He didn't slow down. He pulled me right onto the tracks as the train's light grew, a monstrous single eye bearing down on us. For a crazy second, I thought he was going to try to outrun it. Instead, he veered right, pulling me through an impossibly narrow gap between a signal box and the concrete pier wall. We pressed ourselves flat as the train thundered past, a blur of screeching metal and rushing air that was so close I felt the heat from its wheels. We had made it through by inches. Moments later, we were back in his sedan, speeding away from the port, leaving the sirens and shouting behind us. I was shaking again, but this time it was different, and it wasn't fear. It was the wild, exhilarating aftermath of being saved, of having survived. It was the raw, undeniable thrill of being alive. My hand was still in Lucien's, his fingers laced through mine, a warm, solid anchor in the spinning world. He didn't let go, and neither did I. He pulled a small card reader from the glove compartment and plugged it into the car's dashboard display. I inserted the memory card. After a moment, a file directory appeared on the screen. It was full of encrypted documents, but one folder was labeled BCI Initiative. Bureau of Coastal Integrity, Lucien read, his voice grim. Another ghost, a sister agency to IMCO. He clicked open a file, a master plan document. My breath caught in my throat. It was a detailed proposal for a full-scale protection racket, using the combined authority of IMCO and the BCI to control all independent shipping in Hawthorne Bay. It was a blueprint for a monopoly, signed and approved I scrolled to the bottom of the document, to the digital signature line, and I saw the name. The name of the man who had authorized the entire shadow operation, the man who had greenlit the artifice and the poison, the man who had been my mentor, my first boss, the person who taught me the sacred tenets of journalistic integrity. Reed Kincaid, my editor-in-chief. The name on the screen seemed to burn itself into my retinas. Reed Kincaid. It was a phantom, an impossibility. Reed was the moral compass of the Hawthorne Bay Press. He was the one who had hired me, a fledgling photographer with a portfolio full of nothing but raw nerve. He had taught me the ethics of the trade, his favorite lecture being on the sacred duty of a journalist to speak truth to power. No matter the cost, he'd built my career on that foundation of integrity. And all along, he was the power. He wasn't just reporting on the shadows, he was casting them. The entire IMCO operation, the poison pills disguised as art, the violence and the lies, it all flowed from the desk of the man who proofread my articles on civic duty. The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. "I have to release this," I said, my voice thin and distant. "Right now, I can upload it to a dozen independent news servers in minutes. The whole city, the whole world, will know by morning." I was already reaching for my laptop, my mind racing, fueled by a righteous, white-hot fury. Lucian's hand covered mine, stopping me. His touch was firm, not aggressive, but absolute. No. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. "Don't tell me no. You don't understand. This isn't just a story. This is a betrayal of the highest order." He used his position, a public trust, to build a criminal empire. "I understand perfectly," he countered, his voice a low, dangerous calm that was far more intimidating than shouting. "I understand that if you upload that data right now, raw and uncorroborated, Reed Kincaid will hold a press conference at 9 a.m. He'll call you a disgruntled, unstable former employee. He'll claim you fabricated the data at the behest of a known criminal element, me to discredit him. And while the media is debating your sanity, IMCO will send a team to clean up the source of the leak. They will find you, Marin, and they will erase you." A bitter, frustrated argument erupted between us in the glass house over the water. The air, which moments before had held the thrill of discovery, now crackled with a different kind of tension. I hated being told what to do, being led, being managed. It was the same feeling of helplessness I'd fought so hard to escape after Tyler left. I saw Lucian's caution as an attempt to control my story, to bend it to his will just as he'd offered before. "So I'm supposed to do nothing," I challenged, my voice rising. "Let him get away with it because I'm scared you don't get to tell me how to handle my truth. Lucian, you of all people." "This is not about your truth. It is about your survival," he shot back, his control finally fracturing, his frustration boiling over. He took a step towards me, his hands clenched at his sides. "I hate watching you do this. I hate watching you run headfirst into a wall of bullets, armed with nothing but self-righteous conviction. You think, because you have the moral high ground, that you are indestructible. You are not." The raw anger in his voice stopped me cold. This wasn't the detached crime lord anymore. This was something deeply personal. The air grew heavy, thick with the unspoken weight of his words, charged like the air before a lightning strike. In the sudden, ringing silence, he looked away from me, out at the dark water. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, stripped of all its fire, leaving only the ashes of a painful memory. "I lost someone," Lar, he said, the words barely a whisper, "a long time ago. She was like you, fearless, believed in the system. She had evidence that could have taken down a very powerful man. She gave it to a good agency, one with a polished seal and a reassuring name. She trusted them to do the right thing." He paused, his gaze fixed on a distant, invisible point in the past. "They buried the evidence, and then they buried her." The story hung in the air between us, a ghost that changed the shape of everything. His caution, his control, his frustration. It wasn't about power. It was about fear, a fear born from a wound that had clearly never healed. My anger dissolved, washed away by a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy. I saw the thin silver scar on his wrist, not as a mark of a violent life, but as a testament to some past pain I couldn't comprehend. I closed the distance between us and gently laid my fingers on it. The skin was smooth, the line a pale memory. He flinched almost imperceptibly at my touch, but he didn't pull away. "Let's trust each other," I whispered, the words a fragile offering, just for tonight. He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes searching mine, looking for the catch, for the angle. He found none. There was only the quiet truce I was offering. He gave a single, slow nod. Later, we stood on the wind-swept balcony, the city a distant river of light across the bay. The wind whipped strands of my hair across my face and molded my clothes to my body. Lucian stood beside me, not touching, just sharing the same piece of the night. Without music. He turned to me. "May I?" he asked, his hand hovering in the space between us. I nodded, and he gently took my hand, pulling me into a slow dance. His other hand rested on the small of my back, a point of warmth against the cool night air. We moved together, a silent conversation of shifting weight and quiet steps, our bodies learning each other's rhythms. He guided me in a slow turn, and as I came back to face him, he lowered his head. "Is this okay?" he murmured, his breath warm against my cheek. "Yes," I breathed. He leaned in and kissed me. It wasn't a kiss of sudden, explosive passion, but one of deliberate, profound discovery. It was a question and an answer all at once. My fingers, which had been resting on his shoulders, tingled as a tremor of feeling ran up my arms. A deep, spreading warmth ignited in my chest, chasing away the last of the night's chill and a year's worth of loneliness. My own heartbeat, which had been a frantic, panic drum for the last 24 hours, began to fall into rhythm with his, a steady, powerful beat that felt like coming home. I felt my back arch instinctively, pressing me closer to him as his hand slid up my spine. His touch, a firm, reassuring pressure. My breath hitched, a sharp, involuntary intake of air as his lips parted mine. It was a kiss that spoke of respect and reverence, a healing touch that acknowledged the broken pieces in both of us and found them beautiful in his arms. I felt more than just desired. I felt found. When we finally broke apart, we remained close, foreheads resting together, our breathing slowly returning to normal. We stood like that for a long time, shoulders touching, watching the city lights. We had made a choice. The truth couldn't be allowed to drown here in the dark waters of the bay. It had to see the light, but it had to be done on our terms. "Reed's power is his public image," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "If we just release the data, he'll spin it. We have to discredit him publicly, in a way he can't escape." An idea began to form, a risky, theatrical play. The Mariners Lantern Museum is hosting its annual Acquisitions Gala in 2 days. It's the biggest media event of the season. Reed will be there. He's the chairman of the board. Lucian turned to me, his eyes sharp and focused. "You want to set a trap, in a room full of cameras and witnesses." "Exactly," I confirmed. "We can force all the players onto the same stage. Reed representatives from IMCO and BCI who will want to show their support for their patron. We can expose them all at once." He was silent for a moment, considering the immense risk. Finally, he nodded. "All right, we'll do it your way." He looked me straight in the eye, his expression serious. "But on one condition, you stay by my side. Every step, every single beat." "Deal," I said without hesitation. Our planning session was a quiet, focused collaboration. We took an old, wiped hard drive and filled it with junk data. Then, Lucian broke open a small bag of fireplace ash. "A birthday cake," he said with a grim smile, pouring the gray dust into the hard drive's casing before sealing it again. It was our decoy, a piece of theatrical bait. The next step was mine. I drafted an email to Reed, my fingers feeling cold and alien on the keyboard. The message was short and cryptic. I told him I had a sensitive, exclusive portfolio related to port security and that I wanted to discuss my findings with him in person at the gala. I was dangling the ultimate prize in front of him, the chance to control the narrative, to get ahead of a story he didn't yet know was already broken. I hit send. An hour later, as Lucian and I were finalizing the last details of our plan, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It wasn't from Reed. It was an unknown number, the same one that had warned me away from the warehouse. "You still don't understand." The message read, "I was the one trying to save you." A second message followed immediately. "Meet me before the gala, alone, or he'll let you take the fall for everything." It was from Tyler. The dress was my armor. It was a slip of bronze satin that fell like liquid metal, clinging and flowing in a way that felt both elegant and dangerous. I had bought it myself, with money earned from a series of stark, honest portraits of shipyard welders. It was a declaration of independence. I was not a +1, not a guest on someone else's arm. I was Marin Cole, and I was here to burn down the temple of a false god. Lucian waited for me at the bottom of the stairs at the pier house. He wore a dark suit, tailored to perfection, but had forgone a tie. The collar of his crisp white shirt was open, and his cuffs were unbuttoned, his scarred wrists left bare. It wasn't an oversight, it was a statement. He was in this world of champagne and polite lies, but he was not of it. He would not let them chain him, not even with silk. His eyes drank me in, a slow, appreciative sweep that was so intensely personal it felt like a touch. He offered his arm. "Ready to go to the ball." "Ready for the war," I corrected, and his lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. We walked into the grand atrium of the Mariners' Lantern Museum, and a hush seemed to follow us. The air, which had been buzzing with the conversations of Hawthorne Bay's elite, stilled for a moment. Heads turned. I felt hundreds of eyes on us, the collective gaze of the city's power brokers trying to decipher who we were. Lucian was an unknown variable in their carefully curated world, and I was the disgraced reporter's protege, now on the arm of this magnetic, dangerous mystery. We were an anomaly, a disruption, and they could feel it. A slow, smoky jazz tune drifted from the live band on the mezzanine, without a word. Lucian led me to the edge of the polished marble floor. He put a hand on my back, and we fell into a slow, easy dance. It was a promise, a public reaffirmation of the pact we'd made in the quiet of his glass house, here, surrounded by enemies. His hold was my only anchor. "Reed is by the North Gallery," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my ear. "The IMCO and BCI representatives are near the bar. They look like federal agents from a low-budget movie." I allowed myself a small smile. And Tyler, I hadn't seen him yet. "He's a ghost, not here yet, or staying hidden." Our dance was interrupted by a familiar, booming voice. "Moran, my dear, I was so thrilled when I got your message." Reed Kincaid stood before us, his face a perfect mask of paternal warmth. He was handsome in a silver-haired, distinguished way, the very picture of journalistic integrity. He opened his arms and gave me a brief, social hug that felt like being embraced by a snake. His eyes, however, were all for Lucian. He extended a hand. "Reed Kincaid, I don't believe we've had the pleasure." "Lucian Ardito," Lucian replied, his handshake firm and brief. He offered no title, no explanation. "Ardito," Reed mused, testing the name. "Any relation to the old shipping family?" "A distant one," Lucian said smoothly. "A perfect lie." Reed's smile didn't falter, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He was trying to place Lucian, to fit him into a box, to assess the threat he posed. As he made small talk, I glanced towards the bar. 2 men in dark suits were watching us. Their badges, clipped to their belts, gleamed under the chandeliers. IMCO, BCI. They had the right look, the right haircut, but their eyes were wrong. They were predators, not public servants. Lucian followed my gaze, and the corner of his mouth twitched in a nearly imperceptible smirk of contempt. They were playing dress-up, and he was not impressed. The plan was in motion. It was time for the first move. The gala's top sponsors each had a designated gift bag waiting on a linen-draped table near the main hall. Our target was the bag for a large pharmaceutical company I knew was a shell corporation for Reed's less savory investments. If you'll excuse me, Reed, Lucian said, placing a guiding hand on my back. The catering here is legendary. I was hoping to sample the oyster selection before the speeches begin. As Lucian steered me towards the lavish buffet, he leaned in close. The Southeast security camera sweeps across the gift table every 90 seconds. I'll need a 2-minute window. He walked up to the buffet, and I moved towards the gift table, pretending to search for my name tag. Lucian picked up a plate and then engaged the head caterer in an intense, low-voiced conversation. He gestured towards a silver platter of what looked like imported caviar. His voice rose just enough to be audible, sharp and critical. This isn't beluga. This is oscietra. For $5,000 a plate, I expect the host to know the difference. It was a perfect piece of theater. The caterer looked horrified. A floor manager rushed over. Several nearby guests turned to watch the quiet, compelling drama of a wealthy patron making a fuss. And, just as he'd intended, the nearest security camera swiveled slightly to focus on the source of the commotion. That was my cue. With my back to the room, I located the target bag. My hands moved quickly, my heart hammering. I slipped the decoy hard drive, the birthday cake full of ash, from my small clutch and slid it deep into the bag, simultaneously palming the small, elegant box of handcrafted chocolates that was already inside. I closed the bag, turned, and walked away. The entire swap took less than 10 seconds. I needed air. I slipped away from the main floor and onto a small, curved staircase that led to a private upper gallery. The relative quiet was a relief. I leaned against the cool marble railing, my pulse slowly returning to normal. He's not a hero. Marin, he's a tidal wave. I spun around. Tyler was standing in the shadows at the top of the stairs, his face pale and drawn. He looked nothing like the confident man I'd seen at the club. This was the man I remembered from the end of our relationship, haunted, cornered. He'll pull you under with the rest of the city, he continued, taking a step down towards me. You think you're using him, but he is using you as a battering ram to take out his competition. When the fighting is over, he'll be the only one left standing. Tidal waves don't hide in inspection vests. Tyler, I shot back, my voice cold. They don't need fake badges and shell companies. They just arrive. The words hit their mark. He flinched, the truth of his own small, cowardly role laid bare. His bravado crumbled. You don't understand, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I'm trapped. A bad investment fund. Some leveraged trades that went south. IMCO, BCI. Whatever they call themselves, they own my debt. They gave me a choice: work for them or be ruined. I never wanted this. You made your choice, I said, my voice softening slightly despite myself. I want to make a new one, when he said desperately. I want out. I can give you everything, their main depot, the one they moved to after you hit North Key. It's on the Redwater River, but I need an exit point. I need a guarantee of safety. Before I could answer, a shadow fell over us. Lucian was standing at the bottom of the stairs, his presence so quiet and sudden it was as if he'd materialized from the air itself. He hadn't come to start a fight. His posture was relaxed, his hands in his pockets. He looked at Tyler not with anger, but with the dispassionate gaze of a man assessing a business transaction. You want out, Lucian said, his voice a low, reasonable tone that was more unnerving than any threat. There is a price. The access protocols for the Redwater warehouse, all of them, now. Tyler hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the immovable man at the bottom of the stairs. They'll kill me. We'll get to you first, Lucian replied, the statement a simple, cold fact. Tyler seemed to shrink, all the fight gone out of him. He pulled out his phone, his hands shaking. My sister, he said, his voice thick with a sudden, raw emotion that surprised me. Her name is Chloe. She's a student at the university. She has nothing to do with any of this. You have to make sure they don't get to her. Whatever happens to me, you have to protect her. In that moment, I saw a flicker of the man I had once loved, a small, desperate crack of humanity in the ruins of his choices. Lucien saw it too. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Give me the codes, and your sister will be untouchable." Tyler typed frantically on his phone and sent the data. The deal was done. And then, everything shattered. A loud, insistent bell began to chime through the museum's speaker system. It was an emergency signal. The music stopped. The chatter died. Every head turned towards the main stage, where Reed Kincaid now stood at the podium, his face a grim mask of solemn duty. "Ladies and gentlemen, my apologies for this interruption," he announced, his powerful voice filling the cavernous hall. "But a serious security matter has been brought to my attention." His eyes scanned the crowd and then locked directly onto me. "It seems my former protégée, Miss Marin Cole, has used this evening's gala to illegally obtain proprietary corporate documents." A collective gasp went through the room. The two men from the BCI and IMCO began moving purposefully through the crowd, straight towards our staircase. "I am asking our partners in the Interstate Maritime Compliance Office to escort Miss Cole from the premises," Reed continued, his voice dripping with false regret. "The material she has stolen must be recovered." The trap had been sprung, but not by us. By him. He was using his power, his stage, to publicly brand me a thief and discredit me before I could even speak. The IMCO agents were reaching the bottom of the stairs. Lucien moved to stand in front of me, a solid, unmovable shield. But I stepped out from behind him. I looked past the approaching agents, past the horrified, curious faces in the crowd, and I saw it. A red light on a camera near the stage, the museum's own live stream, broadcasting the entire event to the world. I looked straight into the lens, and a slow, confident smile spread across my face. Let him have his stage. I had mine. "Excellent," I said, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for the nearest microphones to pick it up. "I have a few questions for you, gentlemen." The IMCO agents started forward, their faces set with the grim satisfaction of dogs let off a leash. Reed's voice boomed from the stage, a public condemnation meant to paralyze me with shame. But Lucien's voice was a low, steady current in my ear, a secret frequency only I could hear. "Match my breathing, Marin. Inhale, now. Exhale, now. Follow me." His hand found the small of my back, a firm, guiding pressure. He didn't pull me. He simply turned, and I moved with him, our steps falling into a synchronized rhythm born of the dance floor and the battlefield. We didn't run. We slipped through the stunned crowd like a current finding its path through still water. A sharp right turn, and we were out of the main hall, pushing through a set of swinging doors into the chaotic, clattering world of the museum's kitchen. The symphony of the gala was replaced by the clang of steel, the hiss of water, and the shouts of chefs. We moved past startled kitchen staff, a dark suit and a bronze dress completely out of place, but moving with such purpose that no one dared to stop us. Behind us, I heard Reed's voice, distorted by the distance, shouting for museum security to seal the exits. "Tyler, now," Lucien spoke into his wrist, a command so quiet it was almost a thought. At the same time, I pulled a small burner phone from my clutch. My fingers flew across the screen, initiating the upload protocol Tyler had sent, all the files from the memory card, the plans, the signatures. The entire corporate structure of his criminal enterprise began to flow through an encrypted channel to a secure, anonymous server I had set up years ago for source protection. A thin blue line began to crawl across the screen, my truth, fighting its way to freedom. We burst through a staff exit into a concrete loading bay. The damp night air was a shock. From the south side of the building, I heard a commotion shouts, the sound of a scuffle. Lucien's team, creating their diversion, blocking Reed's path. A black van without license plates screeched into the loading bay, its tires smoking. IMCO. They had anticipated this exit. But Lucien's car, the same sleek black sedan, was already there, engine humming, parked in the deepest shadows. He threw open my door, and I dove in, sliding across the cool leather. He was in the driver's seat a second later, and the world became a blur of motion. He threw the car into a hard reverse, spinning the wheel. The van lunged forward to block us, but Lucien was faster, whipping the car around in a 180-degree turn that sent my stomach into my throat. The tires screamed in protest as we shot out of the loading bay and onto the street. The van was right behind us, its engine roaring. Lucien didn't take the main roads. He plunged the car into the city's vibrant, chaotic heart, into the labyrinthine streets of the night market. The world outside became a frantic, flashing montage. Strings of red paper lanterns, the bright neon signs of noodle shops, the plumes of steam from food stalls, it all washed over the car's hood in waves of brilliant, disorienting color. He drove with a terrifying, fluid grace, not like a man escaping, but like a river carving its own path. My body was braced against the seat, but my mind was clear. I grabbed my camera from the floor. This was part of the story. 2. Through the windshield, amidst the jolts and sudden turns, I began to shoot. The pursuing van reflected in the rain-slicked street, the blur of frightened, curious faces in the market, the evidence of our flight. As we took a sharp corner, his left hand left the wheel and landed firmly on my thigh. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an anchor, a simple, physical statement in the midst of the chaos. I am here. You are safe. The panic that had been trying to claw its way up my throat receded. I looked at him. His eyes, focused on the road ahead, flicked to me for a single, intense second. In that shared glance, a silent pact was sealed, trust. It was a lockpick that unfastened fear. We outmaneuvered them, losing the van in the maze of alleyways. 15 minutes later, we were on the industrial outskirts of the city, pulling up to the Redwater warehouse. The place was dark and silent, but as we approached, a massive roll-up door began to groan open, a ghostly invitation from Tyler. Inside, the scene was surreal. This was no simple storage depot. This was the factory. In one corner, a bank of high-end 3D printers hummed quietly, extruding the hollow, plaster-like shells of abstract sculptures. In the center of the warehouse, a clean, almost clinical assembly line was set up. Machines were calibrated to count and bag the white pills. While workers would have packed them into the art pieces, this was where the poison was born. As the door sealed shut behind us, alarms blared to life, a cacophony of sirens and flashing red lights. From the riverside of the warehouse, another door slammed open, and a wave of black-clad figures swarmed in. IMCO's rapid response team. They moved like chess pieces, fanning out with tactical precision, armed and ready. "This way," Lucien yelled, pulling me towards the towering rows of industrial shelving that filled the warehouse. "Now!" he shouted to his men, who had already materialized from the shadows. Following his command, they began to shove the massive shelves, which were on rollers. The orderly aisles were instantly transformed into a shifting, unpredictable maze of steel and shadows. "I need to get higher," I yelled over the din. I pointed to a metal catwalk that ran the length of the warehouse ceiling. It was the perfect vantage point. He didn't question me. "Go. We'll keep them busy." I scrambled up a service ladder, the sounds of the fight erupting below me. From my perch, I had a panoramic view of the battle. It was a brutal, efficient dance. Lucien's team wasn't trying to win. They were trying to control and contain, using the maze they had created to isolate and neutralize the IMCO agents. I raised my camera. This was my moment. I photographed everything. The IMCO logos on their tactical gear, the 3D printers, the pill packing station, and then I saw it. On a clipboard hanging from a supervisor's station, a detailed inventory manifest for the raw materials. And at the bottom, a familiar, arrogant signature, digitized but unmistakable. Reed Kincaid. I zoomed in, the lens capturing the final, damning piece of proof. A figure scrambled up the ladder behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but it was only Tyler, his face slick with sweat, his eyes wide with terror. "You have to get out of here," and he gasped. "It's all Reed. It was always him. He uses his press credentials to get inside information on shipping consortiums, financial markets. He knows which companies are weak, which routes are vulnerable. He's not a journalist. He's a corporate raider with a press pass. IMCO is just the muscle he rents to protect his investments." His confession was cut short by a shout from below. One of the IMCO agents had spotted me. He was raising his weapon, taking aim. There was no time to think, no time to move. A dark shape launched itself at me. Lucian hit me like a linebacker, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me away from the railing, and a split second before the air where I had been standing cracked with the sound of a projectile hitting steel. We tumbled off the catwalk and fell, landing with a soft, muffled thud in a massive pile of the gray felt they used to wrap the sculptures. He took the brunt of the fall, his body shielding mine. For a moment, we lay there, tangled together in the soft, dark material, the sounds of the fight seeming to come from a great distance. He pushed himself up, his face inches from mine, his breathing ragged. He ignored the chaos around us, his eyes searching my face with a desperate intensity. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with adrenaline and concern. Before I could answer, I surged up and pressed a quick, fierce kiss to his cheek. It wasn't about romance. It was about life, a desperate, grateful promise of survival against the noise and the violence. "No," I breathed. "I'm not hurt." I scrambled for my burner phone. The upload was complete. With shaking fingers, I hit the final command broadcast, a live open feed, pushed directly to the Hawthorne FreeNet, the city's largest independent community news network. I was bypassing Reed. I was taking the truth directly to the people. A shower of sparks erupted from a damaged electrical conduit on the ceiling, raining down on a pile of flammable packing materials. A small flame flickered, then roared to life. The fire alarms joined the chorus of the security sirens. The warehouse was turning into a death trap. Lucian didn't hesitate. He scooped me up into his arms as if I weighed nothing, his grip strong and sure. "Hold on," he yelled. He ran, carrying me through the maze, his men falling into formation around us, covering our retreat. We burst through a side door onto an old iron bridge that crossed the river. The air was thick with smoke and steam hissing from the fire suppression systems. He set me down on the other side, his chest heaving. His men were already disappearing into the night, their job done. The warehouse behind us was now a raging inferno, a funeral pyre for Reed Kincaid's empire. Lucian looked at me, his face smudged with soot, his eyes burning with an intensity that matched the flames. "The end is at Quill Pier," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "Go!" Quill Pier was a skeleton of rotting wood and rusted iron, jutting out into the black, churning water of the bay. The wind was a physical thing here, a relentless predator that tore at our clothes and screamed through the gaps in the old pilings. The fire at our backs was a memory, but the cold from the sea was a present, biting reality. My phone, the burner I'd used for the broadcast, was vibrating non-stop in my pocket. A frantic, buzzing nerve, I pulled it out. The Hawthorne FreeNet feed was exploding, and there, at the top of the feed, was a link to a formal press release from the Hawthorne Bay Press. The headline was a punch to the gut. Discredited reporter Marin Cole aligned with organized crime figure in attack on local museum. I read the words, and the world tilted. Reed's statement was a masterpiece of misdirection and character assassination. It painted me as an emotionally unstable, vindictive operative, manipulated by a shadowy waterfront power broker into fabricating evidence to destroy the career of a respected public servant him. He was using my past, my breakup with Tyler, my freelance status, all of it, to craft a narrative where I was a pawn and he was the victim. Lucian saw the look on my face. He took the phone from my numb fingers and read the screen. His whole body went rigid. A stillness came over him that was more terrifying than any rage, a stillness born of absolute, cold fury. "That's the trick," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that was almost lost to the wind. "It's the same move. They did it before." He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the ghost he had spoken of in his eyes, a raw, profound grief. They don't just silence the truth-teller, they turn them into a puppet, making their truth look like someone else's lie. They make the world believe you never had a voice of your own. Before I could respond, a car pulled up at the landward end of the pier, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Tyler got out, but he wasn't alone. He was half shielding a young woman who looked like a younger, terrified version of him. "Chloe?" He hurried them towards us, his eyes wide with panic. "They're coming," he gasped. "Reed's people. They know you're here. The deal. Ardito. You have to honor the deal. Get her out of here." He pushed his sister forward slightly. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, a silent plea. This was what he had been fighting for, the single, uncorrupted part of his life. I looked at Lucian. His face was a hard mask, his focus still on the betrayal that echoed his past, but I put my hand on his arm, and when he looked down at me, I gave a single, firm nod. We had to be better than them. He held my gaze for a long moment, and then his expression softened almost imperceptibly. He turned to Tyler. "All right," he said. His voice was steady again, the voice of a man in command. "My people will take her now. She'll be safe." But it was too late. A convoy of black sedans, the same kind from the gala, screeched to a halt, boxing us in. Doors flew open, and a dozen men in dark suits and BCI windbreakers swarmed onto the pier, their movements sharp and tactical. They were holding stun weapons, their metallic forms glinting in the headlights. And then, a final car pulled up. Reed Kincaid himself stepped out, a long trench coat billowing around him like a cape in the wind. He strode towards us, his face a mask of sorrowful disappointment. It was a performance, and the entire pier was his stage. "Marin, my child," he said, his voice resonating with the paternalistic tone he had always used with me in the newsroom. It was a voice that had once meant safety and mentorship. Now it was just another weapon. "It's over. Don't let this man destroy what's left of your life. Walk away from this right now, and I can still save your career. I can fix this for you." My burner phone was still in my hand, the live stream still active. I held it up, the small lens pointed directly at him. "My career doesn't need saving, Reed," I said, my voice broadcast to thousands of unseen viewers, "especially if it has to be built on top of the truth you're trying to bury here tonight." His face hardened, the mask of the benevolent father figure cracking. "Then you've made your choice." He gestured to the BCI agents. "Take them." The agents surged forward, their stun weapons raised. Lucian moved in front of me, a solid, unmovable shield. From the shadows around the pier, his own men materialized. Silent and disciplined, they didn't draw firearms. They moved in with a brutal efficiency, armed with stun batons and small canisters. They met the BCI charge not with lethal force, but with controlled chaos. Plumes of thick smoke erupted, sowing confusion. The sharp electric crack of the batons echoed in the night as Reed's forces were systematically disarmed and neutralized. Their numbers and aggression no match for the focused, disciplined strategy of the Ardito team. Reed watched, his face a thundercloud of fury as his plan fell apart. He was losing control of the scene, and so he played his final card. He turned, his face a mask of righteous indignation, and pointed directly at Lucian, ensuring every camera, including mine, was focused on him. "There is your puppet master," he boomed, his voice carrying over the sounds of the scuffle. "Lucian Ardito, the head of the Ardito crime syndicate. He is the true poison in this city, and he has manipulated this poor, confused young woman to serve his own violent agenda." A leaden silence fell over the pier. The fighting slowed. Every eye, every lens turned to Lucian. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and damning. He didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, a king in the ruins of a battlefield. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the terrible weight of his dilemma, the final, impossible choice. "If I tell them the whole truth now," he said, his voice low and meant only for me, "your name will be tied to mine forever. You'll lose your job, your credibility, everything you've worked for. They'll never see you as anything but a gangster's mouthpiece." He paused, the wind whipping at his hair. "And if I stay silent, you'll lose your faith in me." He was offering me an out, an opportunity to distance myself, to save myself. But we had come too far. I looked at the man who had asked my permission to touch me, who had shielded me with his own body, who saw the ghost of a past loss in my own fight for the truth. I made my choice. I stepped forward and took his hand, our fingers lacing together. It was an answer, a declaration. I turned, holding our joined hands up for the camera to see, a symbol of our united front. "The truth is," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity that cut through the wind, "I was having a very bad night. I asked a stranger to dance with me to get myself back." My gaze swept over the BCI agents, the smoke, and landed squarely on Reed. "Everything else that happened, we will be happy to answer for, right after you answer for IMCO, the BCI, and the signature on the Redwater Manifest." Reed's face contorted with rage. He had lost the narrative. "Arrest them!" he screamed, his voice raw and desperate. "Arrest them all!" The remaining BCI agents moved to obey, but a figure stepped between us and them. Tyler. He stood there, arms spread wide, shielding me, shielding Lucien, but most of all, shielding his sister, who cowered behind him, for the first time in a very long time. He was choosing the right side. And then, a new sound cut through the night, a deep, deafening horn blast from the water. A massive barge that had been sitting dark and silent in the channel suddenly roared to life, its deck illuminated by a bank of floodlights, so bright they turned the night into day. Lined up on the deck, dressed in official navy blue uniforms, were the real, official officers of the Hawthorne Bay Police Department. The Freenet broadcast had been their signal. They had been waiting, listening, and now they were here. Reed Kincaid froze, his mouth half open, the color drained from his face. He had orchestrated this entire confrontation, believing he was the director, the sole authority on this pier. He had never imagined that the real law was watching his show. His carefully constructed stage had just collapsed. The chaos on Quill Pier pivoted on a dime. The brutal, desperate brawl dissolved into a quiet, orderly submission as the real police swarmed the pier, Reed's hired muscle. The men who had moved with such arrogant authority moments before suddenly looked cheap and ridiculous in their fake windbreakers as they were professionally disarmed and cuffed. The harsh white floodlights from the police barge bleached the scene of all its noir romance, revealing only the sordid truth. Reed stood frozen for a moment, his face a canvas of disbelief. Then, his survival instincts kicked in. He spun around, melting back towards the shore, trying to lose himself in the shadows and confusion. But Tyler was there to cut him off. He didn't say a word. He simply held out his phone and a small, leather-bound ledger to the uniformed police commander who was stepping onto the pier. The last pieces of the puzzle, the emails, the offshore accounts, the final, undeniable proof that Reed Kincaid was the architect of it all. The director of the play had just been upstaged by his own cast. I walked over to the commander, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and handed her the real hard drive. "Everything is on there," I said, unencrypted. As if on cue, my burner phone lit up with a notification from the Freenet. They were rebroadcasting the entire unedited stream from the gala and the warehouse, now intercut with the live footage from the pier. The city was watching. Public opinion was a tidal wave, and it was about to break over Reed Kincaid. The commander turned her attention to the man still standing beside me. Her eyes took in his expensive suit, the quiet authority in his stance, and the disciplined way his men were now fading back into the darkness. Their work done. "And who are you?" she asked, her voice betraying no judgment. Lucian met her gaze without evasion. I'm the man who controlled these waters because people like him. He nodded towards a now handcuffed Reed. Left a vacuum. I did what was necessary to prevent something worse from taking root here. He looked from the commander to me. A silent, profound statement passing between us. Tonight. That changes. The route that brought this poison into our city is a problem for the law now. I'm handing it over. That's a generous offer, the commander said, a hint of skepticism in her voice. But your own operations, your tax on chaos, they don't just get a pass. I don't expect one, Lucian stated calmly. I will submit to a full investigation of my consortium's activities. In return, I want full protective custody for Tyler Holt and his sister, and for every piece of this shadow organization to be permanently dismantled. It was a negotiation, a final, stunning move on the chessboard. He was sacrificing a pawn and a rook to protect his king and queen, to protect his city, and to protect me. My last conversation with Tyler happened near a police cruiser, its flashing lights painting our faces in strobing blues and reds. He stood with his sister, his arm wrapped protectively around her shoulders. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of his anger and ambition. Thank you, he said, his voice quiet, for doing the right thing at the end. We're done now, Tyler, I replied, not with anger, but with a quiet finality. From here on, we're just a story that's over. He nodded, a flicker of the old sadness in his eyes. Be careful with him, Marin, he whispered, glancing at Lucien. Then he turned and guided his sister into the back of a waiting car. A new chapter of his life beginning under the watch of the very law he had tried to outrun. As the last of the police cars pulled away, taking Reed and his phantom agencies with them, a sudden quiet fell upon the pier, and then the rain began to fall. Not the light drizzle from before, but a heavy, cleansing downpour that slicked the old wood and blurred the distant city lights. Lucian came to stand beside me, the rain plastering his dark hair to his forehead. Let me take you away from here, he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the sound of the storm. I looked at the empty pier, at the dark, roiling water, at the man who had walked through fire with me. I shook my head. There's one more dance. He understood immediately. He took my hand, and in the middle of the rain-soaked, desolate pier, with no music but the rhythm of the storm and the beating of our own hearts, we danced. His hand rested on the small of my back, in the same place he had first touched me, the place he had asked permission to hold. My hands found their way around his neck, and I leaned into him. This dance was not a performance or a deception. It was the truth. It was a silent, solemn vow made in the heart of the storm. He lowered his head, and his eyes asked a final question. I answered by rising up to meet him. The kiss was soft, a gentle touch of lips that tasted of rain and salt and survival. It held no desperation, only a profound, quiet certainty. It was a promise that lingered for a moment, a spark of impossible warmth in the cold night, before he pulled back, honoring the beautiful, fragile line between passion and peace. The Freenet camera crew, the only media brave enough to follow the police onto the pier, was still broadcasting. I turned to their lens, my hand still in Lucian's. Tonight, a lot of people were wearing fake badges and pretending to be heroes, I said, my voice clear and steady over the sound of the rain. I'm choosing to put my faith in the one man who stopped in the middle of it all to ask me, step by step, if I was okay. A uniformed officer approached us, his expression respectful. Mr. Ardito, the commander would like your formal statement down at the precinct. Lucian nodded. He turned to me, his hand tightening on mine for a second before letting go. If you want it, Marin, he said, his voice low and serious. If you want me to, I will walk away from all of this tomorrow. From the business, from the name, from everything that would force you to have to explain. I looked at the future stretching out before me, a future where I could finally write the truth. on my own terms. And I looked at the man who was willing to dismantle his entire world for me. "Tomorrow," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I want to write, and I want you to have breakfast with me before we each go face our own part of the story." My investigation, titled "The Phantoms of the Non-Existent Port," was published 2 days later on the Hawthorne Freenet. It was the first story I had ever published under my own name, on an independent platform, without the shadow of a powerful man over my shoulder. It was a victory, won on my own 2 feet. The final scene of our story didn't happen on a rain-slicked pier or in a burning warehouse. It happened a week later, at a small sunlit diner called the Blue Kettle, overlooking the bay. The coffee was hot, and the air smelled of salt and fried bacon. I looked across the table at Lucian, who was watching me with a quiet, easy smile. I leaned forward, a playful glint in my eye. "Could you dance with me?" I asked, my voice a conspiratorial whisper. "My ex is watching from the bar." He laughed, a rich, genuine sound that filled the small diner. He reached across the table and took my hand. "Even if no one in the world was watching, Marin," he said, "I would still dance with you." He stood up and pulled me to my feet, and there, in the middle of the crowded diner, he took me in his arms. The shutter on the camera of my mind came down, capturing the final, perfect image. The climax was over. The knots were untied, and our future was an unwritten page, waiting for a new story to begin. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from, so drop a comment below with your city or country and let's connect over our thoughts on Marin and Lucian's journey. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and give this video a like. And if you really want to support the channel, hit that hype button to help more people discover this story. Your support means the world.